All right, everybody. Today we are going to be working on our first draft CSS document. So I've got my second draft HTML here, which has all of my content, for the most part, in place. I've got a logo in the top. I added some carousel images to the slider here. I added my content, all the text throughout, so there's no more placeholder content. There are projects everywhere, images, all that jazz. Same on the About page, just got some pretty basic information. Portfolio, I started filling out but haven't fully completed. You should have this done by now, though, with as much content as you're going to have. And same for contact. We're going to talk about how to update this. But aside from that, we are ready to start styling. Right now, everything is still pretty basic, and by that I mean we have the default system font, all the spacing, just whatever was in from the template is what we've got now. And it is now time to dive in and do a bit more customizing as we're putting the final polish on. So again, HTML should be all of our content and all of our structure should be in place. And the CSS now we can turn to the look and feel and the style, the colors, the fonts, the spacing, the layout, all of that. So we've got two drafts to do that. This first one, we are going to do a couple of key steps, and I want to review a couple of the options that we have at our disposal. So obviously our website already has at least one CSS document. Yours probably has a Bootstrap CSS as well as a custom CSS for your theme or template. It might be big, it might be small. If it's a theme, it's probably a lot bigger, and if it's a template, it's probably a lot smaller. This one was a template, so there's just a few things in here, making the carousel work on the home page, and a couple of little CSS padding. Otherwise, everything is in Bootstrap, and again, this is an enormous document that we don't want to change because it's crazy, and breaking anything would be really difficult to fix. So we're going to have layers of CSS here. But before we even get into CSS, we need to remember that Bootstrap comes with a lot of built-in customizable options that we don't actually need CSS to do. So depending on what component we're talking about, whether it's buttons or typography, there's a lot of built-in styles. So rather than doing everything from CSS, we should start with the low-hanging fruit that we have on Bootstrap customizations. So that could be changing the style or the color of the button. Again, we've got these standard buttons that are buttons. We've got different button tags, like making buttons outlined, different sizes, all of that. So all of this can be done just by changing the class name. So all of these classes refer to pre-built CSS styles that are within Bootstrap, and all we need to do is select the proper class for them to be displayed. So again, just a quick example of this. Let's go down to a button on the home page here. We've got this Learn More button on the About Me section. If I click it, it will take me to the code. I've got button, button primary. So if I wanted to change this to a different color, like a yellow warning button, I would just change it from button, button primary to button, button warning. And that's going to automatically change the color, the mouse over, all of that. So again, pretty simple customizations we can do. It's important to know what the options are so that before you dive in, you've really got a sense of what's already pre-built that you don't need to redo. So the nav bar has some similar options. If we go to our nav bar here, let's see, we've got a few, but some that we had talked about before were the light and the dark, so less about the content that we want here, but yeah, some color schemes. Some light, some dark, the ability to customize it with further styles so we can put in exactly what background color we want. So let's say that I like this dark one, but that my colors image, let's say that I want to use sort of this darker blue over here. I'm just going to copy this here because I think this is helpful. So I'm going to copy this part. This is going to be after the class. It's going to be part of the style. So if I go into my nav bar here, got it. So I've got a lot of different classes. It's a nav bar, it's fixed to the top, it's expanded large, it's a dark, the background is dark, and it's fixed to the top. So then outside of this quote, I would add in style to set the exact background color. And then from my preview, I'm going to pull up the hex color that is 150578. And hopefully it lets me. I might have some conflicting. Yeah, okay, so I need to delete that dark background for this to actually work. Sometimes you might have conflicting different classes. So that one, it wasn't letting me do the overriding background color because I had a tag, I had a class that was specifically for backgrounds. So I just needed to go and delete that, and then I can see that that's going to work. I do, however, need to make this update on every page because right now, if I go over to my portfolio one, that didn't automatically update because I didn't make the change on that page. If it was in the CSS document, it would automatically apply to all pages, but because it's HTML, I need to make sure that I'm going through and updating each of them. So I'm going to go through and do that right now before I forget. And last but not least is contact. Not replacing the whole nav bar, just the part that I had changed, because there are other things that are unique to each page that I don't want to mess up. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to save all. All of my files should be saved. I'm going to take a look and see what the preview is looking like now. Cool, matching my color scheme a bit more. There are some other things I need to update, like this footer should probably be the same color as that one. But I'm going to leave that for now. And I'm going to click through and make sure that my menu is looking the same on all pages, which is great. Also going to see how it looks small. So once it condenses, great, the colors transfer over, everything looks good. So again, these are changes that I can make without actually customizing a CSS document. So I would explore what options you have with every component. The documentation is on the Bootstrap website. You can go through and you can see exactly what is there and ready to customize, just code that's ready to go. Once you've done that, we can start to create our own custom CSS. So say that I want to change the header font because I think this font is boring. This needs to happen in a CSS document. And even though we already have two, I want to make my own CSS document where I can keep track of all of my changes. There's a zillion styles set in this Bootstrap one, and there are some ones specific to making my template work in this one. So I don't want to mess those up. So I'm going to go to the CSS designer, and I'm going to click plus on sources and create a new CSS file that I can just call style.css. I want to make sure that I'm saving it in the right folder, both in my overall folder, but then also within CSS. I want to save all my CSS in the same place, and I'm saving this as style.css. Great. I'm going to click OK, and now I have that selected as a source. Oh, interesting. I think I accidentally did it underneath my existing style, which I did not want to do. I'm going to undo that. Glad I caught that. I did not want to link it within there. I want to create a new CSS file. Might be that it just doesn't let me, and this is how this template actually works, but that should not be the case. Okay, not the end of the world as long as I can keep everything separate. I know what happened. I had my CSS document selected. Sorry about that. So we want to have our HTML document selected. And I'm going to go and delete that document just so it is not confused in here. Sorry about that. Okay, so from my CSS document, we are going to create a new CSS. It should let me link it now. That should have been a clue that I was doing the wrong thing because I had the CSS file selected. Okay, so I'm going to try this one more time. It's linked. Now it is its own style document. In the CSS or in the HTML up here, it should automatically create a link to that document, and it should do that on all of my pages. It might not have done that automatically on all of my pages. Okay, so I'm going to do that manually just to make sure. We can see that I've got first my Bootstrap CSS, then the modern business and then my style.css. And I'm going to go through and put that style.css on each of my pages. Should have done that automatically, but it did not. I want to make sure that that is being referenced on all pages, otherwise it won't work on all of the pages. And again, we can see this is custom styles for this template. So I'm going to go back, I'm going to save all, and now let's start with some easy CSS changes. Right now, I think the font that's being used here is pretty boring, so I'm going to select my style document. I'm going to make sure that I've got style.css selected. I'm going to go create a new selector, and body is a good place to start because that's going to affect everything that is in my document. I want to make sure that show set is unchecked, otherwise nothing will be shown because we haven't selected anything. And then I can specify what font I want to use. I want to do a custom font. Let's take a look and see what custom fonts we've got here. I want to find a nice sans serif that I think will be a good, slightly more stylistic font for us to use. Nothing too crazy or stylized. I want something pretty simple that's going to look nice, pretty small. Let's try this Economica. Why not? So when I do that, it's going to, again, select Economica here. It's going to do this embedded font. And suddenly, all of my fonts are changed to Economica. You notice that it changed both the paragraph, it also changed the headers, all of that. If I just wanted to make it the paragraph, I could change my selector just to P, and it'll just be the P. Separate from that, though, I could say, like, this is great, but I want to do some added styling. So let's say that I have my H1 object right here. I can see it's an H1 by selecting it. Next, I can make sure that style.css is selected, and if I click +1, it's going to give me a whole bunch of different things here, but all I really want is an H1. Sorry, that should not have a period in front of it. Now for H1, I can do some of the same. I can select the same font. I can make sure that it's a bit bolder, so I want to select the bold one. And suddenly all of my H1s will be bolded. And I could also specify a font size at this point, but I'm okay with the size that's there. I think that's looking pretty good. I think all of these are looking pretty good. Although the body font is a little bit small. And instead of changing the size in this body font, because it would change the size on all of them, I'm going to make a new selector just for P. And I'm going to give this whatever size I want. So I'm going to say, let's make this in pixels. And let's try 12. Way too small. So again, this is a little bit trial and error depending on what measurement system you're using. And that's looking a little better, a little bit bigger than it was before, but I'm going to bump it up to 20. Excellent. So I'm going to save everything, and I'm going to go back. Yep, I want to update the web fonts on all of these. It's updating my pages automatically. Great. Now let's go back and take a look at my preview. Awesome. I think that's looking a lot nicer. I've got a little bit of color and style going. The fonts look a bit more customized. Everything's pretty legible. I could go through and keep customizing these a little more. I could change my H1, my H2s, but I think this is a pretty good place to start. I'm starting to see some spacing things, though, that I want to change, and this is a good example of two things. So one, I saw in my modern business CSS, which is the code that came with the template, let's get to the About page, that now my headers are getting really close to the menu, and that's because I added this logo, which made the menu bigger. So before, there was just this top padding of 56 pixels, which is no longer enough. So I'm going to increase this to, say, 75. See if that's enough, maybe a little bit more. And again, that was looking through and seeing that there was something already preset there by poking around my existing CSS. So I didn't need to create a new selector for that. There was already a selector, although I could have done and it wouldn't have broken anything. But that gave me a little bit more spacing. Check out the homepage though. Some of the things on here, the spacing was just a little bit off. Like I thought it was really too close to have this featured project section right after this paragraph here, and it was just a little bit close for comfort. Let me pull up a preview so I can just show that again. Just thought it could use a little bit more breathing room. So I'm going to create my own class so that I can select that. Let's take a look at the code first, and let's see what this object looks like. So I can see I've got a div class that's a row. Within that row I have a column, and then I have my h1 for my name, and then my paragraph for the description here. And it's all one object. So I want to select this object overall, and I want to give it its own unique class. If I went and created a selector in the CSS for row, that would apply to like a whole bunch of different other rows. I've got a million different rows in this project, but I only want to mess with this row right now. So putting my cursor inside of the quotes here, just like I would do with Bootstrap, I can just add more classes. But unlike Bootstrap, these classes that I'm adding don't already correspond to pre-existing CSS styles or selectors. I'm going to create them. So I'm going to create a space here, and I'm going to write my own one that's called intro header. And then I'm going to select that. With my cursor placed in here, if I select the CSS Designer style.css and then go to new selector, it's going to have a bunch of this built in. But again, I only want intro.header. So if I select that and hit enter, I have now made a selector that is only affecting this section. And there's a really great way to test this too. Let's just select it and change the color. Let's write red. And now only this box should be changing. Sorry for that car horn. So I know that my selector is properly working now because it didn't change the color of the whole document, all of the text, all of that. It just did this object. So what I want to do is find the spacing area here and give myself a little bit of padding on the top and the bottom. So adding 20 pixels on the top, and let's say 50 pixels on the bottom. Now I can see that's 20 up here and 50 down here. And if I save all, I can take a look at my preview and refresh to make sure it's refreshed. And now I've got a bit more margin here, a bit more wiggle room, which is exactly what I wanted. And I can do that for anything and everything. Let's say that now there's not that much space here, and I want to create some space. It's all about just creating my own custom selector, if not working with an existing selector. So I'm going to navigate to this object and see again, I've got a row that's this entire object. I've got a div column with then some text, and then this image and the button, all of that. So I want to apply this to the whole row. So I'm going to call this about me row. With my cursor still here, if I select the style and plus on the selector, I gotta have my style selected, plus on the selector, again, I just want dot about me row. We need to put periods in front of classes that we're creating. If it's a class that already exists in the document through HTML, just like h1 or body, we don't need a period. Classes are the ones that need period. So I'm going to add an about me row, and then let's say on top of this, I want to add another 20 pixels, just to give it a little bit of space there. Excellent. So this is all looking pretty good now. I've got a custom font. It would be great if everyone had a custom font. I've made my own custom CSS. I've fixed things within the document using the existing CSS. There are a few more things that I could fix on here if I were finishing this up as my own site. One of them is not liking that the text over here, it looks great on this first slide that's white, but then on this next slide, it is not visible at all. So I would either need to make my images standard so that a light or a dark text look good on all of them, or I would need to change the font using CSS, or the font color using CSS, to a color that looks good on all of these backgrounds. Some of these too with links. On my portfolio page, all of these link somewhere right now. But they don't actually actively link anywhere. Let's take a look in the code. So to make something a link that isn't actually linking anywhere, you just use the link object, but you point it to a hashtag. So let's pull up one of these. I can see I've got an ahref link here, but instead of going to another page.html, it's just a hashtag. That means that it is not an actual link. There is a file in here that came with my template called portfolio item. So if I were building this out as a full website, I would create one of these pages for all of my projects, so that when I clicked on that link on this page, it would take me to a page that had a lot more information about this one project. Because I'm not going to be doing that, though, and that's okay, we don't have to have all these individual pages, that was not a requirement. I do want to get rid of the link, though, because I don't want to make it look like something that you can click if you can't click it. So if I get rid of that, that should be fine. It is no longer a link. I just get rid of the opening and the closing link tag. Great. I'm going to do the same for the image, because I don't want the image to click and link anywhere either. Awesome. So basically, we only want to have links where there are actual links. So if you have a situation like this where you're linking, or it's built in to link to a project and it's not actually going anywhere, we should get rid of that. I'm going to do the same thing on my homepage here. Although in this case, I want this Learn More button, if it's not already linking. I want this to go to the About Me page. Yep, so this is going to About Me. That's great. But these projects here, they all have links, and they aren't going anywhere. At a minimum, what I can do, I'm going to select this, is I can link to the portfolio page. So it's actually an active link. Let's change this so that it's going to portfolio 2, because that's my portfolio page. And for now, I'm just going to do that for each of my active projects here. So it can still be a link. Oops. What did I just break? Too many quotes. Yeah, so if you have an error like that, it's going to break all the code afterwards, and it's going to give you a red line. So I had too many quotes in there. I want to make sure that the images, the cards, all of that is linking to portfolio column 2. Okay, so a few more ones that I can finish up, but this is more than enough for our first CSS draft. Again, we want to have a custom font. We want to have made some bootstrap changes using classes. We want to create our own custom CSS document. And we want to make sure that the changes are applied on all pages. In our very last draft that we'll do next week, we're just going to be doing some final polish, last little bits before we finish up our code and upload everything to the server so that the websites are live on the internet.